start. So, Pranhanda a croeso, good afternoon and welcome to our latest knowledge sharing webinar. Dwi'n gweithio i'r ganolfan gwasanaethau cyhoeddus digital. So I'm Edwina and I work for the Centre for Digital Public Services as the Head of Comms and Engagement, and I'll be facilitating this session today. Before I introduce today's speakers, I'd like to take you through a few pointers which will hopefully make the webinar run as smooth as possible. I know most of you are familiar with Zoom as a platform, so this is a Zoom webinar, not a meeting, so you don't need to worry about the mute function. When you join, you will automatically join on mute. If you want to ask a question, there are two options. So the first one is by raising your hand. You can do this by using the button at the bottom of your screen. If you can't see that button, click on participants and it should be visible. If we see your hand up, we will unmute you and take you in to ask your question then. Or you could just ask it in the question bar at any time and we can pick it up from there as well. We would encourage you to use the chat function to talk among yourselves. Really interested to know who's here and if you've any experience of working in a multidisciplinary team, and if so, how have you found it? It's all about using the tech we have to build our networks, albeit virtually. So we've got an hour booked in for the session. We may not need it, but we may well need it depending on the questions and the comments that come through from you. But if we do finish a little bit earlier, well, then that's absolutely fine as well. If you have any technical issues or general comments that you want us to address, just pop them in the chat and my colleague Gemma is on hand to support with that. And we will be recording the session, as you heard at the top. And that's just to make sure that we're able to share it with those who are unable to make it today. And it will be on our website and our social media channels later this week. We would encourage those of you who speak Welsh to ask your questions in Gymraeg, and we have our colleague Llynos here who will happily translate for the panel. And we would encourage you finally to tweet about today's session as well. So our Twitter handle is at CDPS_Wales. So down to business, the session is going to be looking at building multidisciplinary teams, and this is one of our 12 digital service standards. Our standards are encouraging all public service providers in Wales to adopt and embed them, which will help deliver better services for those who use them. If you're not familiar with our standards, we will pop the link to our website in the chat and you can have a read of the other 11 there. But as I said, this is focusing on multidisciplinary teams. We've got three parts to the webinar this afternoon. First of all, we're going to hear from Scottish Government. They're going to be talking about the importance of multidisciplinary teams and how they operate in practice, specifically around their cloud programme. And then we're going to come back home to Wales and we're going to hear from the team at the Welsh Nursing Care Records. They're going to talk about their implementation of multidisciplinary teams as part of that work. And then finally, we've got our very own Anne Kempster, who's the head of delivery at the CDPS. And Anne's going to talk through really how we're supporting organisations and teams to operate in this way, both from a culture, training and delivery point of view. So the speakers will take about half an hour, and as I said, then it's over to you for questions. So first up, we've got Dregos Leonte from Scottish Government. So Dregos, over to you.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for having me. Today I'll give you a short presentation about multidisciplinary teams and how we use them in the Scottish Government. So I shall start sharing my screen and hopefully it will work if technology is with us.
Yep.
Okay, that's great. So I'll kick off the session with a short presentation about principle number 7, about building multidisciplinary teams, a bit about a theory, how we could do it effectively, and then give you the exact example of how we've done it in the Scottish Government, the challenges that we had and the pros and cons of it, and how we succeeded in our projects by using this approach. So this should work. Okay, so like I said, we'll be talking about principle number 7, having a multidisciplinary team. Having the right people for the project is the key thing to having a successful project. And one of the key things about having agile multidisciplinary teams is that you don't need to go overboard with it. You just need to have the team members that will provide an output. You know, you have to be very brutal when you're creating the team and making sure that only the people that are relevant to creating that output and contributing the ticket that you are trying to deliver within that sprint. Agile methodology aims to have a much more pragmatic approach to developing outcomes, and especially if it's a project that you have split into multiple sprints, it's important that you have very clear outcomes at those sprints, and the teams are very motivated and very clear on what they need to deliver. Having smaller teams is an advantage of doing that. And one way of creating a small and effective team is by using the team onion, which is a model created by Emily Weber, and it's referenced in your multidisciplinary team principle. So using that principle, we can start having a look at what that actually means, having the core team, having the collaborators, and having the supporters. So it's not expected that you'll work with all the same people all the time on the project. The project may have different priorities, it will work at different gears, and there will be dependencies that you'll have to wait on more than likely in an agile project. But the core team will usually stay the same, and you'll have to collaborate with various stakeholders and various collaborators that will come and go depending on the team responsibilities. So for example, the core team may work with specialists from procurement or from security in order to drive their project forward, because once you split it into smaller tickets, then these distinct tasks become easier to manage and easier to understand who needs to do those tasks. So if we quickly jump into the core team, what does that mean in an agile delivery? So we can have the Scrum Master, the product owner, developers, designers, business analysts, technical architects, user researchers. These could be the core team. And they are always working on the projects. They have sprints, the daily stand-ups, and they do the sprint retrospectives, the planning. They will be involved in all of this because these are the key agile ceremonies. And the core team needs to understand what they are all working on and how they collaborate. That's one of the most important things, because you're not just doing your own little thing. If you're a business analyst, you're just focused on business requirements, or if you're a technical architect, you're focusing just on the technical architecture. It's important to understand that team members are responsible for delivering those tickets that have been selected during the sprint, and they need to collaborate to deliver those. And it's not necessarily about having strict, rigid rules and responsibilities. The core team is responsible for delivering all the tickets, and they need to collaborate. So if business analysts need to work on something that's technical or vice versa, that's absolutely fine. That's expected within the core team in an agile project. It's having a team model in terms of developing individuals rather than very strict ones. Having that variety, that versatility really helps the core team to push forward the tickets that need to be delivered during that sprint. And when we have to collaborate with specialists, it's important that we know when they come during the sprint, and that's schedule, because as part of having an effective team, you need to know how to schedule your resources, because it's expensive to have, for example, procurement support available at all time, security support, or any other support that might need to have for that project. So for example, if there are multiple projects running concurrently and there are dependencies around those projects, you need to understand who are your collaborators, collaborate, and when you synchronize to make sure the resources are available. So that needs to be planned a bit more in advance. But bringing specialists to support the team is a key aspect of having an effective agile team, because you need to have the specialists when you need them, and you need to use them only for the time you need them, because otherwise costs will go out of proportion. So it's important to have that clear delimitation. And then finally, we have our supporters. Supporters will be, the steering groups, governing boards, the people that we will generally, the SROs that we have to present our progress updates, show the sprint demos to make sure that progress is being achieved, and that the goals of the strategy are being achieved, and we are delivering what we have proposed to deliver. Now, supporters, they are on the outer ring, and therefore they don't need as much interaction. So the core team don't need to have this interaction on a daily or weekly basis. This is on a fortnightly, monthly basis when you have your steering groups or your sprint demos, which could be at the end of the sprint or at the end of a couple of sprints when you have something to show. So how do these collaborate? In an organization the size of the Scottish government or the Welsh government, we will have multiple silos, multiple teams working to deliver concurrent projects. So it's important to understand that there'll be the same sort of layout. Ideally, there should be the same sort of layout across the digital environment, and these teams need to collaborate with each other. And like I said, it's important to understand the synchronization between the teams, And that needs a little bit of more forward planning when we have your core team, your collaborators, and understanding when they all sync in order to deliver those tickets for the Agile project. So how does that actually work in practice when we've got a lot of priorities, we've got to deliver a lot of stuff? I'm going to give you a quick example about the cloud program. So this is the program that I'm currently assigned to as a principal business analyst. And we have a Agile project methodology. We are delivering the project and the program in sprints. So we follow the standard Agile ceremonies, as you can imagine. And there are multiple stages that we go throughout the cloud program, the cloud migration service, when we engage, assess, set up the co-development of the solution with our partners. So, for example, we are currently working with partners within the Scottish Government from the broadband connectivity team. And that's to increase broadband within rural parts of Scotland, like north of Scotland, to ensure there's like 30 megabytes a second broadband within north of Scotland in rural areas. So we're delivering some cloud functionality to them to move some of their workloads in the cloud for geographical information systems, for analysis and use of evidence, and for communication with broadband suppliers, like, for example, whether it's BT or Virgin Media or whoever else. So it's moving some of those workloads, and it's a long process, and it involves dealing with multiple partners, multiple stakeholders, and having this core team that has that communication really helps the project move forward. And I'll show you exactly what I mean, because I've modeled our team based on the Onion team that I just explained earlier. So in the core team, we have business analysis, technical architecture, and service design. Now, on my screen, for some reason, everything is in the middle. It should be 3 quadrants with 3 different responsibilities, but I'm not sure if you're seeing it right or I'm seeing it wrong. It might just be the formatting. So technical architecture, analyzing technical architecture and proposing solution, working with the service design to design customer interaction service journey, working with the business analyst to define business needs and service strategy. That's how that's the core team, and that's how we devise the cloud migration minimal service. Now, the core team, we have to collaborate quite closely with our infrastructure engineers, with our technical, with our security architecture, and with our developers. So the infrastructure engineers, these are collaborators. We don't expect to work with them all the time. That's why they're collaborators, and they come at different stages within the project. They can come initially in alpha to build the infrastructure. We may have some testing that we do afterwards, and then we'll have another beta. And then that's when the infrastructure engineer may come again, for example, to implement some of the feedback that we received after the alpha. So these resources are not required at all times, and that's why I've put them as collaborators within the migration service. Again, with security, we will do vulnerability tests initially, we will do pen tests, but again, these are tasks that can be scheduled at later stages, and that's why the security architect is marked as a collaborator rather than a core team. Security is a non-functional requirement that permeates the entirety of the requirements that we have for the project. So the security architect will come at the beginning, middle, at the end, and to make sure that throughout all our stages, alpha, beta, live, we've met all the security requirements for cloud migration. And then the developer, you might be wondering, well, isn't the developer at all times? Well, not actually, because they just need to write, test, and debug some of the code that we will be implementing. A lot of the solutions that we create are from commercial off-the-shelf products. So the infrastructure engineer and the developer will sometimes collaborate to write the code to link all the applications, the components together and deploy the pipeline. And once it's deployed in the cloud, then that's it. It's a much more simplified way of managing the infrastructure. And then finally, we have supporters. So that will be the service owner, might be the technical design authority, and the SRO. So they sit out the perimeter of the migration service, and the service owner is accountable for it. So we'll get frequent updates about the progress of the migration service. The technical design authority, they sign off on the migration service project, on what we're trying to achieve on technical design, if it's secure, if it's feasible, if it's value for money. And then the SRO, which has the wider program responsibility, ensuring that the migration service adheres to the principles that we've had established, and also delivers the technical strategy that we are trying to promote. So these would be the core team, supporters, and the collaborators. So what we mean by alpha delivery, we don't just create this by ourselves. We communicate with our users quite frequently. So we start with our draft, with our assumptions, and then we test it with the user, and that's how we deliver the project. We test our assumptions, we test the artifacts that we're creating, and we adapt to whatever user requirements there may be. We use commercial off-the-shelf products, and then we use them in the deployment pipeline, but we don't create anything that's custom. Whatever we create for the user will be using commercial off-the-shelf products, so we don't create anything that's difficult to maintain, difficult to implement. So this is how we design the service, and the zigzag between delivering and designing the service is critical to having an iterative approach, which is principle number 8 of the principles for designing and delivering digital projects. And then this is, for example, how we iterate on our design. The first screenshot about my minimal viable service, that was when we had our assumptions, how we created the draft. And then the snapshot to the right is once we collaborated with the users, found out a bit more about the user needs, how they wanted the sessions to be run, and then how we designed the templates. So we iterated multiple times on our templates and how we interacted with users, and we learned a lot from those interactions. And that allows us to be agile, to continuously improve, and having a service that's suitable for the users that we serve. Okay. And this is exactly what I meant about having an iterative approach. We are collecting experiences from our suppliers, we're collecting experiences from our partners, and collecting experiences from the core collaborative and supporting teams. We gather that feedback, we evaluate what can be done, when it can be done, and then we generate the recommendations that we will put into our Jira boards so we can track the tickets and then add them into our sprints when we can, synchronizing with the other programs and projects that we have ongoing at the same time. So as you can see, it's a process that requires constant review. It's not something that, we've created the document and that's it. We'll put it in our document repository and never look at it again. All the documents that we create, we like to say they're living documents. We start with assumptions, we start with the drafts, and we're always improving them as we go along, depending on user feedback, depending on what our customers want, what our partners want, sorry. So working together with business analysis, service design, and technique architecture, we had an organic approach to collaboration. We picked up the tasks as they needed to be done rather than specific list of functions. And that's what I was mentioning earlier about the need to be organic rather than prescriptive within roles and responsibilities. When you're having a small team, it's generally easier to have this organic approach and making sure that the tickets are being delivered. And then supporting each other to finish tasks allocated in sprint and allowing different perspectives and being open to new things. And then we had to manage partner expectations about budget constraints, partners wanting to be involved in the process and making sure it's transparent and to accommodate different needs. And with suppliers, it was a very similar approach, making sure that documentation was transparent, making sure that they know the context about why decisions are being made. So you can see that, there was the core team, there was the collaborators, and then there were the supporters, and making sure there's this transparency between the 3 layers of the onion as you start to work through the project. And that's the presentation over. It was a whistle-stop tour to multidisciplinary teams, but I suppose the main getaway from this is that you need to have an organic approach. You need to understand why exactly you need to deliver and the bare minimum that you need to deliver, and not overburdening the team, because the core team needs to be small and light and agile and make sure that everyone is contributing to delivering that ticket that's been selected in the sprint.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Dragos, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions for you when we come to that. Next up, we've got Fran and Leslie from Digital Health and Care Wales. They're going to talk about the Wales nursing care record. So I believe you've got slides to share as well. Yeah. Okay, lovely.
Before I put the slides up, just to introduce myself, I'm Fran Beadle. I'm the National Clinical Informatics Lead for Nursing, and I'll be presenting with Leslie. Leslie, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, yes, I'm a head of nursing in Wales. I work currently in Hywel, and I work with Fran on this national project.
Okay, so I'll just go through my slides. So we've come to talk to you today about the Welsh Nursing Care Record. And just to give you a brief overview of what the Welsh Nursing Care Record is, it is an application that's been designed and delivered across Wales as a once for Wales approach, with very much a multidisciplinary team. And the aim of the Welsh Nursing Care Record was for nursing to be able to document their care and assessments for patient care. So the heart of this journey is about putting the patient at the centre of everything that we have done. So I'm not going to read through the vision, but ultimately the idea was that nurses and midwives and the wider multidisciplinary team are able to access and utilise data to drive improvements and learning across health and care in Wales. Welsh Government, this is a Welsh Government funded project, and it is known widely across Wales as the digitisation of nursing documentation. So it's just to give you a brief overview. So within our, within our programme of work, we do have a massive governance structure as part of that. So we have a project board, and there are multiple different work streams within those, the project board, and multiple people who we report to. So as Dragos identified, collaboration is very much the key to success. So there are multiple work streams. Part of those will be a documentation work stream, a technical work stream, and an implementation work stream. So within those areas, there is a much wider multidisciplinary team, and I'll talk to you about that in the next slide around the new documents work stream. But the idea is that all of these work streams come together within the project board to understand and collaborate together about what's the best way forward. So our technical group, obviously we're informed by the clinicians, but the technical team then advised us of the best way to move things forward. And within the work, we're at the implementation phase now across Wales, in which we've implemented across 5 health boards. So it was really important to understand the lessons learned from each health board as they have implemented the Welsh Nursing Care Record. And actually, because like I mentioned, this is a Once for Wales programme, it's sponsored by the Chief Nursing Officer for Wales, and obviously Welsh Government has funded it, but it's all the key health boards across Wales. We have 7 health boards and 1 trust that are utilising the Welsh Nursing Care Record, but also with our clinical colleagues. So, and then underpinning all of that is different specific boards to make sure that the communication cascade is across the whole of Wales. So there are no surprises. So I'm actually the chair of the national standardisation. And so it was very important that obviously the directors of nursing and midwifery lead that, because the multidisciplinary team, if you put the clinical complexity alongside our technical colleagues and our business analysis, that it's quite a complex field. So we would seek advice from specialist nursing groups, from specialist clinical forums, wider multidisciplinary team, to get a recommendation on what was the best evidence and standard, but also underpin that with the assurance that need to be provided to boards to ensure that we are doing the right thing by our patients and increasing our patient safety and reduce the risk of harm to our patients across Wales. So they would come back to us with a recommendation that then went through a governance process across the health boards to ensure that everybody approved that recommendation, finally with an issue of a Welsh Health Circular by the Chief Nursing Officer at Welsh Government. So why do we need multidisciplinary support and governance? We need to ensure that there is buy-in and adoption, not just from the people who are going to be using the system, but actually the people who are going to be looking after the system, and the people who are utilising the data from that system to improve health and care across Wales. So, but ultimately, like I mentioned, we needed to make sure that we put the patient at the heart of everything we do. So it's been the ethos of the programme moving forward to always relate it back to the patient. Is there always a need to collect that data? But also around that, there was the need to translate what the clinician wants to our technical colleagues and vice versa. You'll hear a lot of clinicians say to you that, you know, we've been done to by our technical colleagues, but this has very much been around that we have a system that's been designed by nurses for nurses that actually was easy to use. And I think it surprised our technical colleagues how simple the nurses wanted the system. We wanted it's got to be usable within their daily work frame, but actually also to inform for our physicians and our allied health professionals that they are aware of this information so that they could carry out the care more appropriately and translate the care requirements for the patient. So like I mentioned before, there needs to be no surprises. That, you know, everybody needs to be aware that this work is going on. This is what's going to be implemented, because it's got to be usable by everybody out there in our clinical work frame. So although we standardised documentation for our secondary care patients, it was actually, we standardised our documentation for nursing throughout Wales. So we have one national standard of our documents, which was very important to ensure to future-proof moving forward that our information moves backwards and forwards through clinical systems, and there's semantic interoperability. Identifying those priorities together as a multidisciplinary team, we were all working towards the same goal, which is, I think, is very important, because you can bring that back and that governance to support that we're all working to the same time frames, and that information is informed by all key stakeholders throughout that process. And as Dragos mentioned, collaboration has definitely been the key to our success.
So the WNCR nursing system then did allow, as Fran has said, some speed of standardization. And that was probably because when it came to the forms, we were largely designing them by nurses for nurses to use. What has transpired is, because we've had such mass collaboration on this, that certainly our healthcare professionals, our additional healthcare professionals in the clinical setting now want to use it much more as well. So what we're seeing in practice, and actually in the 5 areas where this has been rolled out, we are seeing social workers, physios, OTs and GPs actually writing in the care record. But I think if we were talking about designing it in a multidisciplinary way, we would definitely be designing it with them at the design table as well. So we're also continuing to work with our healthcare support workers and our student nurses to have appropriate access to the record as well. But we have to think about the multidisciplinary model when we're out there. So currently most professionals write in the record, and that is no different to this particular record. They also write in this one too. So the outcomes we've seen then, standardization and an evidence-based risk assessment tool, which is there for everybody to use, and we are gleaning information from that. There has been multi-professional engagement with developing the risk assessment tools. One example of this is where dietetics has informed what the nutritional tool looks like. And it is a very patient, citizen, user-centric design. If you have ever seen WNCR, you'll see it's a very clean and clear design system to use. So it's not complicated. There aren't multiple clicks to get to multiple different places. And I think that was key. It needed to be simple. I think the other thing which we did was kind of crucial, because we learned a lot of lessons, was we piloted it in all of the health boards and trusts, and we've got a lot of feedback and then made changes. So as of April 19th, 2021, 5 health boards and trusts within Wales went live with over 3,000 users to the system. And that is a 24/7 system is how that's being accessed as well. So that is kind of huge, with all the patients having multiple assessments on them. So it has definitely increased compliance and timeliness of documentation out there of these risk assessments. We can audit quicker now as well. So it's had huge clinical impact already. Increased patient safety due to real-time identification of a risk, and supported quality indicators in line with national quality metrics. So we are just starting to report this information back to board. So this is a system designed by clinicians, informed by the multidisciplinary team, which is now reporting back to board, which is exactly where you want to be with clinical systems, really. More on the outcomes then. Increased professional evidence of nursing input into clinical care. I think that was important. It's difficult sometimes to determine, because healthcare is one of those things that's quite difficult to measure. Now we can start to measure certain aspects of care and certainly the assessment. What we're finding is there's nursing ownership. We're actually finding people being very proud that they have this out there and they're proud for their profession. And many of our nurses have worked across areas. So coming to Wales and seeing this as a system that they may well have seen something slightly different in England, they're quite pleased to see it coming in, because it's a good step in the right direction to where we're moving towards. Like everywhere, we use temporary staffing and nursing students in our clinical environments to care for patients, so they too have safe access to the system, and that was really important, so they weren't excluded. And documentation from admission to discharge that can be seen by everybody. I think it has definitely piqued an interest in our community services to actually look at this information as well, so that transferring patients between different settings can be looked at all digitally. It's improved communication between the wider multidisciplinary team and certainly cross-border viewing of this information, as I've said. It's had a reduction in duplication of documentation and less repetitive questioning of our patients, which improves satisfaction. It's still early days to prove that, but we're not multiply asking questions when we move a patient through our if you think about a patient moving through our ED system into a ward setting and then onto a community setting, that information is all there to be seen. Staff felt new documentation improved assessments of patients' need to inform care, and ability to view the assessments prior to the transfer has also helped with the patient location. Nursing users like the simplicity generally of the Welsh care record. And I think now we're going to hear from some of our nurses that have actually used this system. Better to hear from them than us.
It's changed how I work because everything is in one place. You never lose a bit of paper and you don't have to run around the walls looking for something.
I think it's better to capture all the information with the patients as well, so you can go through everything in one go. So it definitely saves time, and I think it's better for patient care because it means we can spend more time with them than completing paperwork.
It's a lot easier. All the information's at the touch of a button, all the risk assessments are there, and we can read everybody's writing.
The system's been quite easy to use. We were given a lot of support and reassurance from the IT department when we first got up and running, and the access to it is quite easy to navigate once you get used to it.
Oedd yn dysgu yn hawdd iawn, oedd yn hunan esboniadol. we were all very apprehensive, and a lot of staff here have been here for years and aren't particularly IT literate because, you know, they don't usually know reviews at all. And they've all taken in their stride. So if we can do it here at South Pens, I think anybody can.
Don't be afraid, it's really user-friendly, and you'll get plenty of support from the team that provided the service, and you won't look back.
If I can use it, anybody can use it. I'm getting very old now.
So obviously digital systems are not going away, and I think we all as nurses need to be responsible for having the ability to actually use digital programs, and it's going to help the information sharing between wards, between hospitals, and I think it's going to revolutionise it really.
Dwi'n teimlo bod hwn yn mynd i newid nyrsio yn Cymru gan bod e'n mynd i bod yn rwydd I drosglwyddio pethau o un bwrdd iechyd i'r llall. Rwy'n hefyd yn meddwl bydd yn helpu rai pobl I dysgu sgiliau digidol yn fwy.
I think for patient care it would be fantastic because across the board the information could be transferred. So if I went to a different county, the paperwork could go. So I think for communication purposes will benefit the patient and the staff equally. So I think it's a really fantastic service.
Informative, easier to manage.
And it's time saving.
Good, simple, usable.
Revolutionary.
It saves me a lot of time.
Thank you for listening.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And as you say, great to hear from the users themselves, isn't it, around the product, which obviously was built with the creation of a multidisciplinary team. So thank you very much, Fran and Leslie, for that. Going to hand to Anne Kempster now from the CDPS. Anne, over to you.
Thanks very much, Ed, and thanks everyone else for talking about the great work that you've been doing. And we have just heard two really great examples of how multidisciplinary teams work in practice in Scotland and with the nursing care record. And we're doing similar things here at CDPS, where we're working in multidisciplinary teams in all of the project teams that we're involved with. So the teams working on our Accessing Adult Social Care service with 3 local authorities, in South Wales. We have formed multidisciplinary teams as well, where we've brought together all of the sort of usual digital skills that you would expect to find in a digital team, but we've also brought in social workers and contact centre staff to be part of that multidisciplinary team. The work that we're doing with Sport Wales, the team there includes operational staff as well as digital experts, and this is the model that we'll also be using as we start work in the coming weeks with Natural Resources Wales and with other partners across the public sector over the coming months and years. So this approach that we take has a really strong element of knowledge transfer and on-the-job coaching as part of its core. It's a very powerful way of learning new skills in a very hands-on kind of way. So wrapped around the hands-on learning, we're also doing a more formal approach to learning through a skills and capability offer that we're developing for the public sector, and that's being led by my colleague Peter Thomas. I'll talk really briefly about what CDPS is doing to support this more formal skills and capability offer. So essentially there's 2 aspects to this. There's a training and coaching offer, and there's also communities of practice, and a little bit more about each one of these in turn. So our training offer, so we have currently a small offer of a range of off-the-shelf training that we're able to provide to the teams that we're partnering with on projects, and this can be available to other organisations as well where we have some space, and we can have a chat about that offline if anyone is interested in accessing that. This is mostly practitioner level training, but we're also running over the coming months an introduction to service design for leaders as well. In terms of the practitioner level offer that we have so far, we're looking at areas like user research, service design, product management, and content design. So this is an interim step. Whilst this is on offer, we're also spending a lot of time developing a longer term training offer. So we're essentially trying to build and test a small scale concept of a skills academy, and to see how that works, if there's an interest in how that sort of approach of an academy either works or doesn't work. And that offer will have a lot more around the leadership levels of training, whilst also continuing to develop our practitioner training alongside the work-based coaching that we do. So we know from the work that we did in Discovery to set up the centre, and through the collective years that all of us at the centre have in doing digital transformation work, that the leadership side of an organisation really needs to be firmly bought into, and really needs to understand the new ways of working in an agile, user-centred way. These approaches fundamentally change how an organisation operates, and leaders need to be leading and championing these new approaches and not fighting against it as teams are trying to do different things. Last year we ran a series of leadership sessions, and we're using the learnings from those to build a new, bigger, deeper programme for leaders, which should be online over the next couple of months. I also mentioned communities of practice, and we're working to support the development of those communities of practice. So a community of practice is a group of people who share a concern or an interest in something, coming together as either a formal or semi-formal group, so that they can learn from each other and find other people who do the same thing and form a group to help drive that learning forward. So we currently have 2 communities of practice that the centre is involved in leading at the moment. The first of those is around building bilingual digital services, and the second is around communicating digital. So the communicating digital community is a really great example of bringing the different disciplines together. So we're bringing comms and digital practitioners together to start to work together from the very beginning of a piece of work, to work together to deliver outcomes sort of as we go, rather than leaving everything to big bang announcements at the very end of a project. If you're interested in either of these communities or communities of practice in general, Gemma's going to pop a link into the chat so you can get in touch with us and we can have a further chat about that. We'll also be gauging the appetite for other communities of practice over the coming months and years, and looking to link in with existing communities of practice where they already exist so that we don't reinvent the wheel. So if there's any communities of practice in the sort of widest digital space that you know already exist, drop us a line and we can have a chat about how we can sort of join up and support each other on that. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much, Anne. And that point about culture, really important. I'm sure there'll be some questions on that. So over to you now. We've got about 10 or 15 minutes or so. Are there any questions? Let's say 2 options: pop them in the Q&A function, or pop up your hand and we'll bring you in. There's one here around, it's for yourself, Leslie, and Fran. And in terms of a new way of working for you, was it a new way of working, or is it something that you've always done this way? And did, I suppose, how did it go from the start? How did you get buy-in, senior buy-in, if we link back to the culture piece, to work in this way?
I would suggest, obviously, we've always had directors of nursing level buy-in. You know, it was key that they were involved in the process of identifying the priorities and the needs as advised by the users out there. So it's very much been a top-down, bottom-up approach. There's meet in the middle. So it is absolutely a different way of working for nursing out there on the floor. They were very concerned about documenting digitally. They felt that they weren't digitally capable, and I think part of that, as my role as well, is to translate those clinical needs to them, to help them understand, you know, people online shop, people, you know, do their online banking, but actually they don't think when they're documenting their health data that actually it's the same. It's, you know, it's about reassuring. So absolutely, the user design was, you know, we went out there to our users to ask them and just reassured them. And one of the key pieces to success is we have a business change implementation team as well, which is why we've been able to rapidly roll out, because what nurses on the floor were telling us, they want somebody available 24/7 to answer their queries and questions. So that's why it all worked together. So like I say, it was the whole of the wider multidisciplinary team, but with buy-in from executive level, from the chief nursing officer down to the student nurse at the ground level.
Great. And are you seeing more of this across the NHS in terms of working in this way?
Definitely, definitely. I think it's informed all programs moving forward. And I think a lot of it is about, with the watch to review, it's about having clinicians involved in that whole process, but actually it's also the other way around, to having our technical colleagues and, our business change teams. And I think if anything, COVID has really changed the dynamic of people are not so scared of using digital anymore.
Yeah, and that's another question. It's sort of linked to that. Do you think that virtual work and COVID makes it easier to set up a multidisciplinary team? I suppose that's from people's ability and not being so nervous, but also the flip side, it's easier to get people together. So that's a question, I suppose, for yourself and for Dragus. Dragus, do you want to take that first, and then we'll head back to Fran? So do you think virtual ways of working has enabled the setup of multidisciplinary teams in a more effective, efficient way?
I would definitely say yes. So once we started moving to virtual meetings with Microsoft Teams, we saw a definitely increase in our collaboration. We were very rigid in terms of making sure every meeting has defined outcomes. So that definitely improved our collaboration. When we had meetings, we knew exactly what tickets we were working on, what we're trying to achieve, what we're trying to deliver, and there were actions at the end of each meeting. That collaboration definitely helped drive our digital ambitions forward, especially given that we were working on multiple projects and having concurrent timelines that had to be achieved. So absolutely, digital working has definitely increased our collaboration.
And Fran, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I absolutely, virtual has a place, but in person is also good as well. I think sometimes you don't get the people sit back and potentially don't get involved in the conversations. So I still think there is absolutely a place for face-to-face ways of working. And we found that with some of the complex standardization that we've had to do. In fact, we're looking at our nursing care plans at the moment, and there have been times when restrictions allow, we've been able to meet with restrictions in place to have those difficult conversations.
I'm on mute, sorry. Back to Dragus's point about small, perfectly formed teams. It's harder to hide and to sit back and not say anything, isn't it? So another benefit, isn't it? And a question for you in terms of the organisations that we're supporting. What would you say is the biggest barrier or the biggest concern to operating in this way in terms of setting up multidisciplinary teams? Because as we said, it is new. It's not, I suppose, the done thing across the board. So what would be the biggest barrier that we're seeing?
I think it's around making sure that the people in the organisations that we're working with have their time freed up to work on this 100% of the time. If that's 3 days a week or 4 days a week, but not to be doing the rest of their day jobs for the short periods of time that we're doing this. It allows for the team to come together quickly and to make progress because you're not dealing with context switching and changes all the time. So where we've been able to do that, we've been able to make really rapid progress over 8 to 12 weeks. And is the model that we want to try and continue. We know it's a challenge for organisations, but one that we are working through and starting to draw some learnings around. So hopefully we can start to share some of that about how organisations are overcoming that challenge to free people up and the benefits of doing that and what they're learning from that.
Can I just come in there as well? Sorry, just to say, one of the key successes of our programme was that the funding model supported dedicated resources to be able to do this. So it was their day job. We have now across Wales have a Chief Nursing Information Officer in every health board, that is their dedicated role, and a clinical nurse specialist as well, and a product specialist in every health board as well. So it's that joined up collaborative approach, because like Anne said, without those dedicated resources, we wouldn't have been able to implement and develop and design this in such a rapid space of time.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anne and Fran, that sounds great. And there is another question here around language and time. So Dragus, you were talking about ceremonies and sprints, and it's a language that's new to a lot of people when they're coming to agile working and multidisciplinary teams set up for the first time. We've also heard this through some of the blog posts that we've seen on the CDPS website, particularly around the team down at Neath Port Talbot and Access and Adult Social Care, about how time consuming it can be to attend all of the ceremonies. And what piece of advice would you give to organisations and teams starting out in this way in the first instance, Dragos?
One of the key things is that Agile needs to be applied to an organization compromise. Yeah, it's not ideal to use Agile, pure Agile, because that's mostly for software development. When we're working in social care or in policy making or digital, for example, we don't really use pure Agile. We make it work for the teams that we are in, making sure that we follow the principles, but we're not necessarily following everything the exact same, specification as in the Agile manifesto, for example. So when you have sprint daily stand-ups, when you have sprint retros, sprint reviews, sprint demos, it can be overwhelming, and I absolutely agree. And we don't often do all of these. So for example, a sprint demo we will do maybe once a month, not every sprint. So our sprint will be 2 weeks, and then instead of having a demo after each sprint, we'll have it at the end of the month. So we conserve a bit of time. In terms of sprint reviews and sprint retrospectives, sometimes due to time, we do the meeting in the same time. So it's not quite ideal, but it's a compromise that we need to do because everyone's got back-to-back meetings, and it's almost impossible to have the people that you want in the room, for sprint reviews, for sprint retros. So my advice is to compromise and identify what meetings are mandatory. So the daily stand-ups, 10 minutes where everyone speaks and everyone understands what we need to do for the day, what's the dependencies, what's the outcomes. That's the most important meeting. If I had to choose one meeting that I would say is the most important one, is the daily stand-up, because I can speak with my core team, understand what's the blockers, what's the priorities, and I can get on to doing it. Sprint reviews, sprint retrospectives, maybe collect them into one meeting, and then sprint planning is very important as well. Because then we can determine exactly what we want to deliver in that 2-week sprint, and then think a wee bit about the demo that we want to do in 2 sprints time. So stand-ups, most important, followed by sprint planning, and then the sprint review and sprint retrospective, they can be combined into one.
It goes back to what you said at the start about flexibility and working in a flexible way, isn't it? Anne, is there anything you'd add to that from, I suppose, what you've seen or the experience working with teams across Wales?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring it back to what Dragos was talking about in his presentation about the team onion and the different roles within that. I think it really helps to do that exercise with the widest possible team at the start to really identify who that core is. Not everyone needs to be at all of those, so making sure that you identify that really tight core group of people should help to take some of that pressure off diaries as well, because not everyone needs to be at everything. It's about what's right for to attend is what your role is within the team as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And multiple people may serve different purposes. So for example, the product owner may also be the scrum master. So, it's not rigid in the sense that, you need to have these roles. These role responsibilities can be taken by other people, like a product manager or delivery manager, or the business analyst can do the delivery management. It depends on the people, their skills, and the project, and how, like I said, if it's a team model, versatile team.
Great. Any final questions? No? Okay, lovely. Just to say a big thank you, diolch yn fawr iawn to our speakers, to Leslie, to Fran, to Dragos and to Anne, very much appreciated. Thank you for taking the time to join us and for feeding in your questions. If you have any feedback on the session, we'd love to hear it. We're learning as we go here, so you can either drop us a line or you can contact us on Twitter or on LinkedIn. And our next webinar is going to be on the 8th of December, topic TBC. So if there's any topics that you'd like to see as part of this webinar series, well then do get in touch and let us know as well. Have a lovely rest of your afternoon, and diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.